Ready, set, go!
Registration is now open for the Middle States Commission on Higher Education 2023 Annual Conference. It's in Philadelphia, December 4th through 6th, 2023, setting the standard transformation through accreditation. You don't want to miss it. Register now at msche.org.
Surprise!
We're taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us for an incredible higher education marketing and enrollment management conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back here on another episode as we have finally, I've been leading up as we've done these episodes. I say we're almost at 700. Well, we passed 700 now. We've passed 325,000 downloads of this podcast. We continue to bring amazing people to the microphone. And I'm going to tell you about an excursion that I had. I had what I would like to call a full circle moment. Or at least that's what my mom said when she told me it was ironic that I was going to be going back to my alma mater, SUNY Oneonta, which so this is what happened to me. I flew into Cuse. That's short for Syracuse. For anybody that hasn't been to the Cuse, we call it the Cuse. Flew into the Cuse from St. Louis on, what day is it today? On Tuesday night. I went to dinner with my mom, stayed for a couple hours. It was bittersweet because I could see my mom like once or twice a year. So I was in, I was out. Drove 2 hours to SUNY Oneonta, which of course SUNY, if you don't know, State University of New York, College of Oneonta, and got to be on campus for the first time in over 20 years. And memories came flooding back of my experience in higher education, further cementing to me of the true value of a 4-year degree or however many years you get your degree in. Just so much I grew up there, right? So I got to give a keynote speech about the future of higher education to faculty and staff at SUNY Oneonta, hopped back in the car, drove to Albany, New York, hopped on a plane the next morning. I'm back in St. Louis. And ironically, the person who's co-hosting this episode with me today is in Syracuse. So bring it all full circle right now. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest co-host today, you know him, you've heard him. He is Dr. David Lind, and he is Director of International Programs for the College of Professional Studies at the Cuse. David, welcome back.
I'm so happy to be back. I missed being on the show.
I missed having you here, my friend, and had I had more time, I would have called you up and we would have gone out for a cup of coffee or something, man. So, but next time. But my mom was more important, but I don't want you to take that personally.
You may have made it to the Dome and you would have been able to see a 65-0 run of a team that will not be named.
Holy crap!
Yes, sir. Well, I'll tell you what, next time, David, and we'll be doing the EdUp Experience live from the Cuse. So when you get me your president on the podcast too.
All right.
For that one. So tell Kent, right? Tell Kent, you better get on it, man. We don't wait for anybody here. I want to bring our guest to the mic right away. She's got a lot to say. She's doing very important work. We're going to get her here. Here she comes. Ladies and gentlemen, she's Dr. Zillah Fluker. She is the Director for Executive Leadership at the United Negro College Fund. What's going on, Zillah? How are you?
Hey, good afternoon. Great to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
And of course, you have a connection to the Cuse at one time in your career. Isn't that the case?
I absolutely did. Spent the last 4 years living in the Cuse, where I had a chance to meet Dr. Lind, and miss it already.
Well, how do you like that? Well, I'm sure the Cuse misses you just as much, but we're not here to talk about Syracuse as good as it is, Dr. Lind. We are here to talk about the work you're doing at the United Negro College Fund. Can you talk about the fund? Well, first of all, for somebody that hasn't heard of the United Negro College Fund, what is it? Talk to us like we've never heard about it before. And what is your role there? What do you do? How do you do it?
Yeah, so United Negro College Fund, UNCF, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Nearly 80 years ago, a commitment was made to create a fund to really help offset the expenses for students to attend college. We have 37 institutions that we call our member institutions, and I work specifically for the Institute for Capacity Building. UNCF is best known for raising nearly $5 billion to date of scholarship funds to support students and to really advance the mission of Black higher education. The Institute for Capacity Building was founded in 2016 by our current CEO, Dr. Michael L. Lomax. And the vision there was really to create an entity that will partner directly with institutions to help them build capacity. We saw that that was an opportunity to really help expand and position our institutions to have more sustainable programming and initiatives in a way that would really help them advance the agenda. My area specifically is a newer vertical. It's called executive leadership. And we are focused on working directly with the college presidents, the board of trustees, and we focus on strategic planning, accreditation support, as well as just focusing on the office of the president to make sure that we help the vision be realized.
Amazing.
See, I told you I was going to hit that. So what's capacity? What because capacity can be used in a number of different ways. Iron that out for me when you say we're building capacity. In what, for what, how, who, all those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at historically Black colleges and universities, one of the things that's pretty consistent across the board is limited resources.
Yep.
And so capacity building is our team members going in and taking a look at institutional operations. My colleague likes to say that our institutions are already excellent, but we have to help them see, because when you look at the average employee at the leadership level at an HBCU, they have 7 to 9 commas behind their names, right? And there's a lot of work being done, a lot being accomplished. We call it them punching above their weight, but there's so much opportunity to get operationally savvy and get stronger in order to make sure that those resources, whether it's the human capital or the resources the institution acquires, are being applied for greater impact, but also sustainable practices and processes are being built so that more efficiency can come into play so that the organization can run in a way that's better positioned to serve, in our case, majority first-generation students, first-generation African-American students who come from a lower socioeconomic background, and being able to make sure those institutions are there not just for the current student, but have long-term availability to continue to serve in delivering on the promise of Black higher education.
Nailed it.
So how are we doing? How is the U.S. doing right now delivering on the promise of Black higher education? You know, because, recently, or at least over the last, I'd say 18 months, a lot of articles about particularly Black men not returning to school for various reasons. Where do things stand right now in your eyes?
Yeah, I think we're at the intersection of opportunity and challenge. When you think about, there was a very reactive component. Let's just talk about resources and dollars, right? Post George Floyd, there was a lot of opportunities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think helped elevate the visibility and importance, and quite frankly, the resource that HBCUs could play in addressing the DE&I efforts and initiatives. We have seen an uptick in enrollment across the board, but that has not come without challenges. Of course, the pandemic came into play, which was a big challenge, because it's one thing for a student who comes from a home that understands the college journey. It's another thing for a student who's the first to experience school being shut down for a few years. So we did see some loss there, but we also saw some resources being infused at a federal level, which quite frankly really helped a lot of our institutions, and those with that were working in the capacity building space were better positioned to apply those dollars in a meaningful way. And then since then, we've seen philanthropy really take a turn to be more about performance-driven philanthropy versus sort of just general generosity. And overall, I think, we are at a unique moment, but the responsibility we have as those who work as intermediaries like a UNCF, but also at the institutional level, our responsibility is to take this moment and turn it into momentum. And that's what this capacity building and focusing on sustainability is really going to do in terms of positioning these institutions that have been here for over 150 years to be able to be here for the long haul.
David, I'm going to pass it to you, but I need you to pull it together.
Would you stop screwing around?
All right, now you can go, man.
Okay, I will stop screwing around, and I'll ask Dr. Fluker a question, a very serious question. So, does the Institute for Capacity Building offer a course on juggling? Because it seems like HBCU presidents are experts at that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would say that. I mean, I'll go back to punching above our weight. if you look at something as basic as graduation rates, oftentimes HBCUs are criticized for having lower graduation rates and across the board. But if you extract the African American student from our majority institutions, what you'll see is that the graduation rate is actually higher at our institutions, and that's across all HBCUs. And so you ask yourself the question, well, how, with limited resources, with turnover, leadership at the leadership level, are these institutions able to do that? I think it is significantly because of the agility of the leaders who are hired into the space. They come in with very, very aggressive goals against major challenges, and somehow find an intersection of leveraging the legacy and history of HBCUs, but then subsequently building upon that by bringing innovative and or creative ways to not only respond to opportunity, but to create a path that will make sense. One of the big challenges that we're faced with is oftentimes when people think about HBCUs, they think about them as a single category, but it's not a monolith. When you look at Spelman College against Russ College, against North Carolina A&T University, against Alabama State University, those are very different institutions. Yes, it's less than 120 institutions, 107, depending on who you ask on any day. But the truth of the matter is that each of those institutions really serves, while a similar mission, sometimes a very distinct and or targeted population. And I think that the leadership that we've been able to identify, a lot of our presidents could easily be in a non-presidential role at a major institution, a majority institution, earning, in some cases, double their pay. But oftentimes people make a conscious decision to take their talents and go into a space that has a set of challenges, and they run into the fire, aware of all the details, and quite frankly, face some challenges, sometimes don't have a long enough tenure to get done what they need to get done. But the vibrance and tenacity of that population, I think, is what has been really helping this journey continue to move on.
Opportunities like it is.
So, can I ask a quick follow-up, Joe?
Sure.
You can do whatever you want, Dr. David T. Lind.
Equipping the current and future leadership of HBCUs with limited resources for success. So no pressure, right, Dr. Fluker?
No pressure.
Now, I was curious, as you know from our previous conversations, I have a research interest in executive leadership. And early on in my dissertation research, I was stumbling on anecdotal evidence that HBCU presidents seem to have a more natural and fluid communication with their audience base. And that shows up on social media. And I wonder if that's a reflection of what you were referring to just now about some HBCU presidents taking a cut in pay because they're deeply committed to the mission. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Dr. Lind. When you look at our presidents, I often say that they have a part-time job, and their part-time job is to be brand ambassadors for the institution, whether it's for recruitment, engagement, or overall retention of their students. And so I like to highlight a particular individual, Dr. Kevin James, who's the president of Morris Brown College. He's often asked the question, how did you resurrect an institution that had not had accreditation for an extended period of time? They never closed their doors, but had very, very few students. But how did you take that institution to having a pretty decent amount of students, which you doubled in this last year? They had over 500 students this particular fall. And his simple answer will always be social media. He looked to social media as a free resource, but more importantly, utilize his own activity, his own platforms to then build a brand, not only around himself, but around the institution to inspire those who had been members and or part of the Morris Brown community, but more importantly, to attract a new population. And so the presidents tend to have a high tendency to utilize the platform. I can name countless others in a way that really helps serve the institutions and allows their individual brands to be a part of the effort that really helps engage constituents.
You think that's a part of the human connection, right? I think we talked to presidents of many institutions, and there's a spectrum of social media use. Definitely see HBCU presidents using it more often. Or I don't know if I say use it more often, but use it in different ways where it's like, here's me being a regular person. I'm literally walking the streets for my students, to do this or to do that, versus here's me at graduation, with the medal on. There's a humanistic part of this, of using social media. So the student turns around and says, because a black student can go anywhere.
Absolutely.
And why should they go to an HBCU? So I've got to sell something else. I've got to sell you some part of coming to this HBCU that you may not get somewhere else to the level you're going to get it here. And maybe it's that human connection with other students, other black students, or the community of black students, or something else. And does it help the visibility help sell that?
Yes, yes. And I think it not only helps sell and promote that, but it also helps create, we talk about a sense of belonging oftentimes. And I think that when presidents use their personal platform, right, the institution is going to use the president's profile by nature of the role that the president plays. When they use their personal platform, and I would argue that there's a level of authenticity. Some are successful in having team members in their public relations areas that can really make it feel personal. But there are some, like Dr. David Wilson, president of Morgan State University, I am convinced is going on his Facebook page, his LinkedIn page, and actually doing those posts himself.
Nailed it.
One of our finest institutions that's likely going to reach the R1 status, the R1 institutional status. I think that the way that he's working his digital engagement is very deliberately with significant intention, and he personalizes it as often as he can, but stays on mission and on message. And I think that helps him do his work. And that's on a different spectrum, of course, obviously, than Kevin James at the Morris Brown Institution.
David, one more for me. I want to just talk about the elasticity around DE&I that we're seeing in this country right now. To build off your point a little bit, post George Floyd, a lot of money coming in for HBCUs, a lot of attention paid to HBCUs, and rightfully so. And now fast forward, states are saying no DE&I in our public institutions. The role can't exist, or these programs can't exist, or this curriculum can't exist. It's sporadic across the country in certain areas and others, but you have HBCUs, CUs in those states that are saying none of that, please. How does the UNCF react to that, or do you? Is there a political lobbying group? Do you say, you know what, we need to double down on our efforts in these states, or you know what, we're gonna award in these other states? Is there that kind of conversation that goes on, or is it just kind of the political sphere is the political sphere?
Yeah, we have a very strong government relations arm of UNCF, led by a gentleman by the name of Rodriguez Murray. And on any given day, Rodriguez is at the Capitol and dealing at the local municipal levels as well, whether it's the local mayor. And his team really looks at those nuances and how they really affect our institutions. But I would argue, and I'll pick on Florida as an example, and I'll pick on, the few HBCUs that we have there, and I'll target one in particular. I'll talk about Edward Waters, who unfortunately had a really unfortunate incident last week. As a result of all this racial turmoil that this country is experiencing, they were almost attacked. Thankfully, vigilance of their officer and their students, they were able to divert that attacker to a different space. And so they're dealing with this every single day. And I know that as they're navigating through this from a UNCF perspective, because they are a member institution, we are there as a resource. This is not Institute for Capacity Building. This is UNCF at the Washington, D.C. level, to partner with them as they're navigating through their crisis management, but also their government relations efforts with the sensitivity that there are some changing dynamics in the environment. And we partner with them to understand where they stand, and then partner with them to determine what is our message as a collective, because they're the boots on the ground. And then UNCF is, if you may, the muscle that can really help drive whatever that messaging component is. And we had a really coordinated effort that centered around President Zachary Faison as it related to how they responded to that particular challenging situation, which I think captures what you're highlighting.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think the country has to come to terms with is, we can't just see there's very swift elasticity in some of these things. It's like for 1 second here, 1 second there. And I know for many people of color, they're going, okay, wait a second. What we built all of this and now it's coming backwards. How do we prevent that from happening? And institutions like UNCF and others that have been there for 80 years, like you said, are always keeping eyes on this, saying, how do we invest? We have to continue to invest. We can't stop investing in educating people, right? Because if we do, we're really not in the right space. So there's just there's a lot to watch, I guess, is my bigger point. And each state has its own nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the organization, how does UNCF navigate each state's influence and each institution's consequence of that influence? It's a lot. It's a lot to keep eyes on.
It is. And I think we rely very heavily on the institutions with the boots on the ground. But that collaborative partnership with our government relations arms, understanding, listening, but then also looking at it from a national perspective, and then juxtaposing that against the standards of the institutions, but then also of UNCF, and then leveraging the resources. We're very fortunate to have a lot of funders and supporters who are watching as well. And on occasion, we'll get outreach that, hey, how can we be supportive to help address this very specific challenge that we see here? But I think that listening component and leveraging the institutions' eyes and ears on the ground and the expertise and resources at the federal level, for lack of better words, is really what helps us navigate through and then determine real time. It's a lot of fun as a communications professional to sort of watch all the activity happening in real time, because the other part of it is to respond, but also to respond in a timely manner. And we're finding that that's a great learning experience. And a lot of it is real time transitioning. And this is a time where the volume is so much higher than ever that I think even internally, we're learning great lessons on how to be more efficient in doing that and doing it effectively.
Should you register for the Middle States Commission on Higher Education annual conference this December 4th through 6th in Philadelphia?
100%.
I agree, because the title of the conference is called Setting the Standard, Transformation Through Accreditation. There is no time like the present to explore opportunities in higher education and the future for our students and our business model. Get out and network with your peers this December 4th through 6th at the Middle States Commission on Higher Education annual conference.
Attention.
Are you ready to elevate your institution's marketing and enrollment strategies? Join the EdUp Experience podcast at the Insights EDU conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Don't miss out on this opportunity to hear from engaging speakers from industry-leading companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, and higher ed leaders. Learn the latest marketing and enrollment strategies to grow your programs. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration.
Attention.
Well, if you didn't know, Dr. David Lind has more questions for you. That's why you're here.
Surprise.
All right,
Surprise,
Dave, back over to you.
Okay, so I wanted to pivot back, Dr. Fluker, to the Institute for Capacity Building. And so, Joe has interviewed a lot of different college presidents on the show. Some are leading institutes that are universities that are well-resourced and some less resourced. And in my dissertation research, I was very interested in how college presidents can learn from each other. And it seems to me that the HBCU college president community has a networking system that works, right? So that there's that cliche, it's lonely at the top. And I wonder if HBCU presidents feel maybe less lonely than college presidents, more broadly speaking, because they have cultivated that community. And returning to the Institute, does your Institute actually try to foster that sense of community among the college presidents?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I regret that I know you personally, because people are going to think I text that question to you so I could have a great answer for it.
Actually, he stole that from me, that question. I prepared him for that.
No, I mean, that's a really, so smaller population. We just had Dr. Janetta Cole give a commencement address to our sitting presidents and the HBCU community. It was called the commencement. She uses the term sister president and brother president. And that in and of itself, I think, captures the essence of how these presidents operate as team members. I'm not talking about the 37 at UNCF. I'm talking about across the board. So we see a lot of camaraderie, a lot of collaborative behavior and activity. There are a lot of different major events that happen annually where you'll see a high volume or population of presidents. I'll speak proudly about Unite 2023, which is the UNCF's Institute for Capacity Building's major convening, which took place in July. And in that particular convening this year, which was the second year under the brand Unite, we had a very specific presidential track for the first 2.5 days. And it was designed to do exactly what you're talking about, bring about major topics for presidents to understand, hear from, or participate in, but then also a lot of informal sessions that were presidents only, so they could have that thought partnership opportunity and an opportunity to share their experiences to then not only be collaborative, but to also share some best practices and or solutions to address. I think the network being smaller, and in this case, we had 44 presidents present. There were some non-HBCU presidents. We have some PBI, predominantly Black institution presidents, who were also participating, but we're able to pull them together more easily because it's a smaller population. So we do see that camaraderie. But then you also see programming and initiatives that come in through our funders. I'll use Blue Meridian Partners as an example. Blue Meridian Partners funds our institutions in cohort groups. We identify a group of cohorts. And what I love about that example is it's not just the UNCF member institutions, which are the privates, but you also have the Thurgood Marshall College Fund institutions, which are the public. So that's North Carolina A&T, Alabama State University, Elizabeth City. And so we're bringing those presidents in groups of cohorts of say 10, 20, and then in cohorts, so cohort 1, cohort 2. And that creates another sense of community as well. And those opportunities also provide an opportunity for them to come and gather and again, have the formal structured programming, but the informal networking, which I think ends up serving as a primary source of support for these presidents to be able to deliver on the promise of Black higher education.
Epic.
Fantastic. And Joe, I'm going to ask a follow-up if that's okay. So one thing I know about Dr. Fluker through our previous conversations is she has an interest in international education, and she has an international story herself. I'm interested, and I think our audience might be interested in how HBCUs integrate international recruitment, whether that be on the student side or staff side, and if the Institute addresses that need in any way.
Yeah. So HBCUs have had a long-standing history of international recruitment. My family came to this country, and HBCUs is where they attended. My family has a history with Howard University, Morgan State University, and Southern University, and Miles College, where my mother attended. So my story in particular is very much that of the plight of Zimbabweans who came to America and started their journeys at HBCUs. But you see a long history of HBCU recruitment in the STEM fields in particular. And where we see that best represented is if you look at our faculty members who are at the helm in some of the leading research opportunities, and not just faculty members and individuals from the continent of Africa, but you see a large Asian population. I often think about the story of a friend of mine who served as a mentor, and his name is Mike Suko. Mike Suko is the CEO and president of Coca-Cola Bottling Company United. And he tells a really beautiful story about how his Cuban grandfather came to the United States with an earned doctorate and the ability to teach, and could not get a job anywhere else except at Miles College. And he is right now at the helm as the captain for their major 7-figure capital campaign. It was an 8-figure. Anyway, big figure capital campaign because of his duty, one, in his job and role. But I would argue a big part of it is also how his Cuban grandfather was presented with a tremendous opportunity, which he gives credit to who and what he's become. So that international relationship has been there for years. As it relates to the Institute for Capacity Building, by default, when we're looking at processes for our institutions, it's touching the entire institution. We're helping them get better and stronger in the work that they're already doing in excellence. But that then allows them to have the capacity to look at other creative ways of recruiting, which obviously includes the agenda around international recruitment, international engagement, and more importantly, international retention and graduation rates.
By the way, and little sidebar here, but I think I've got 3 of these officers on this podcast already. Your institutional directors, of course, a great friend of the podcast, Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, one of my all-time favorites. She's come on and even co-hosted with me recently. Nice. Got Walter Kimbrough on this podcast, former president of Dillard University, and Reynold Verrett twice on this podcast. Nice. He does some awesome work down there in Louisiana. Why? There's 107 HBCUs or so, right? Why wouldn't they partner with UNCF? Like, what's the, for executive leadership and capacity building? Is there, why not 107? Is there,
great
you
question.
Know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So if you look at the origins of UNCF, UNCF was created, one of the premises was to accommodate the private institutions to help offset their expenses. And so that's why the population is segmented that way. That's the private focus. So those 37 institutions are private institutions. However, I think it's important to highlight, and I'm glad you asked that question, the Institute for Capacity Building works with over 44 HBCUs. And so oftentimes, because of the work, the quality of the work that the team is doing, we'll get a call from Capital One or from JP Morgan Chase, and they'll say, hey, we love that model, and we're going to pick our own schools. We'll invest the dollars. We will select our own schools. And so what that does, it allows the Institute for Capacity Building to expand our focus. I'll call on a couple of examples. You talked about Morgan State University. Morgan is definitely a Thurgood Marshall institution. However, we work with them. They're part of our cohort work. You talked about, Southern University, another major institution, as well as, other schools that sit on the other side. But Thurgood Marshall College Fund is a strong partner to the United Negro College Fund. In fact, we had a call today at 11 o'clock every Thursday because with the Blue Meridian Project, which is focused on HBCU transformational work, Blue Meridian Partners came in and said, hey, we want to partner with both of you, and you each identify. So when I talk about the cohorts for the Blue Meridian work, it's actually schools including the UNCF member institutions as well as the Thurgood Marshall member institutions. So Elizabeth City State, North Carolina A&T, Florida A&M, all those institutions that are not necessarily in our purview. But I think Institute for Capacity Building, I have to say this, I think we're on a really unique trail because as we acquire and amass additional funding, we're in a position to really take this work and apply it across the board gradually.
Well, maybe you're going to have to come back and co-host with me, Zillah, when I interview Andrea Horton from the Thurgood Marshall Fund on November 8th. She's the chief marketing officer there. Maybe you'll be my guest co-host on that one.
I will, and I'll help you pronounce her name correctly. It's Andrea.
Andrea. Okay, well, see, I already need you more than say. I'm going to need you big time already.
He was on the 11 o'clock call I just referenced.
That's awesome. So there's obviously, I bring that up for a reason, since you brought it up, that we're all connected in one way or another to
Absolutely.
educate humans. What's the sense among the leaders right now on where higher ed sits? Are we relevant? Do we need to become more relevant as leaders to keep recruiting these students? Is the 4-year degree really in that much jeopardy right now amongst the leadership? Is it a discussion point?
Yeah, a key discussion point. I think, higher ed is more relevant now than it ever has been. All right. Yes, organizations are saying the degree is no longer needed, but I think the higher ed model is expanding to look at workforce development. And so I think there's some creative ways that we see schools. I'll pick on Spelman College. Spelman has launched their eSpelman initiative, which provides certificate programs to help strengthen, quite frankly, the workforce. They're not the only ones. Others have done it. If you look across the board, it's more important today than I think it ever has been, particularly because so many things are changing. But one thing that's consistent, particularly with the African-American population, is that higher ed has been and still continues to be a game changer. Not just for the individuals who go and pursue the degrees, but we have research and data that shows it impacts and advances and repositions that individual's family, and subsequently that community as well. So that higher ed degree attainment still matters and is something that I think we on the higher ed side need to be creative and flexible, No one says they love COVID, but I think everyone loves what COVID did to accelerate higher education, to be more accessible and understand the importance of being more efficient in the delivery model. And so I think that the opportunity that presents us now is in how do we package that? How do we message it? How do we message it as those of us who are institutions built and designed to grow our states? So the state-funded institutions, but then also those who are positioned and well structured to support particular majors and or fields. And I think being thoughtful about, there are a lot of us out here, but I think the data shows that we're all needed in some form or fashion. So how do we tighten up our processes, reduce our cost, and position ourselves to have higher impact in those that we actually serve?
I'm glad you brought up Spelman. David, I'm going to kick it back to you in a second, but I don't think we put it out yet, but I just interviewed Helene Gale from Spelman,
Yes.
which, by the way, she's something else. She's a physician. She was
Yep.
a medical doctor, came
Yep.
to higher ed because she felt compelled and to kind of double down on education for her community. That says something, right? So when the degree is in question, but you have people outside of higher ed coming into higher ed to double down on their work to push out the message of education, it tells you exactly what you're talking about. That it's more valuable than ever. We have to figure out how to communicate it better. Which I always say we have a packaging problem in higher ed. It still always had value, but we forgot how to say that it had value, and we let others say it didn't without fighting back just a tad. So I just wanted to throw that in there because you brought up Spelman and great work going on there. David, back to you for a final question before we close it out.
Yes. So one thing I really appreciate about Joe's approach, apart from his sense of humor,
The only thing you appreciate about me, by the
and
way.
his willingness to abuse his co-hosts, is that
This is lunacy.
is I think there's a certain honesty in the approach. So I'm going to, when we talk about executive leader training programs, right? And we've all gotten an invitation to these leadership programs. Sometimes you see people that we may work with roll their eyes and feel like it's not a good use of their time. So I'm wondering, when on the programming level, Dr. Fluker, do you bring in facilitators or industry experts? And are they involved in the delivery of the program? How I guess the overall question is, how do you make sure that your participants, the college presidents, walk away feeling that their time was well spent?
Yeah, brilliant question. Yes, the answer is absolutely. We are fortunate enough to have funding resource where we have what we call presidents in residence. And those are decorated presidents who have had great tenure and experience. And so there are 4 of them that my area works closely with. We meet with them every week. Our PIRs, as we call them, include individuals like Dr. Haywood Strickland, who's president emeritus of both Texas College and Wiley College, Dr. Beverly Hogan, who's president emeritus of Emerita of Tougaloo College, Dr. Charlie Nelms, who is the chancellor emeritus of North Carolina Central University, one of the most prolific HBCU presidents today still. And then we have Dr. Billy Hawkins, who's former president of Talladega College and Texas College. The 4 of them serve as our library, as we call it, because I've never been a president before. And so they are our go-to source when we're providing advice, counsel, programming for the presidents. But in addition to that, I mentioned that we didn't factor this in the beginning, but I'll tell you, when we started having one-on-one meetings with presidents, we saw that there was a natural community of practice amongst the presidents that we were working with. But then when I talk about accreditation support, we have subject matter experts in accreditation who work closely with our accrediting bodies, whether that's HLC or SAC-COC or whoever your accrediting partner is. And we bring them in as consultant partners when we have major accreditation opportunities to explore. And then everything in between, whether it's finance or other areas. So we have funding and support to actually bring in those resources. But I have to say that my team and I have been training and developing ourselves where when it comes to strategic planning support, we facilitate that internally. We have individuals like myself. I've been at the game for 12 years and have served as VP of advancement at 3 institutions, including one of our member institutions. And we have other folks like my Vice President, Ed Smith-Lewis, who's a subject matter expert in a lot of things, but specifically has worked with major funders like the Gates Foundation and has a keen sense of strategy. And so we use our internal resources to facilitate to an extent, but we know when to reach out and bring in consultants to help us navigate through for the sake of credibility. But what we're seeing is that our presidents are more and more leaning into us and saying, hey, UNCF, what you all have is what we need, and that's enough. So they're starting to be pleased with how we're equipping and preparing ourselves and showing up to provide them that support.
I have to know, I was navigating your website. I got to know if you're wearing orange chucks right now.
I'm not. I'm wearing. Can I show you what I'm wearing? They're orange.
You can. Yeah.
So I'm wearing orange.
Orange. You got the orange Crocs on. All right.
Crocs. Yeah, it's hot out here.
Yeah, that's all good. I was like, you know what? I went to your website. I mean, she's got the orange chucks on. I don't know if that's a Cuse influence or if orange is just part of the branding.
Orange is part of the brand. I'm a big partner and believer of the Why Not Win Institute, and I believe in winning every day. Although Dr. Lynn would like to think it has something to do with Syracuse. With all due respect,
it's funny because he did say that, just for the record, before when we were talking. He said that's probably the Cuse influence.
Orange is a color of inspiration.
Love it. It's actually my favorite color too. Awesome. So we have a good connection. Final two questions for you. Is there anything else that you want to say about UNCF? Open mic moment for you. And then close us out with what you see for the future of higher education.
Yeah. UNCF has been at this game for nearly 80 years, $5 billion to help advance students who have an interest in pursuing higher education to change the community. The Institute for Capacity Building is very excited about the work that we're doing, particularly as we see the evolution of our partner institutions, not only in the work that we do, but also seeing how it inspires them to go on and do more meaningful and important work. We know that for a lot of individuals, our HBCUs serve as the opportunity platform. And so we strongly believe that if we continue doing the work that we do, we're not only moving the needle, but we're making the difference. And we are positioning ourselves to inspire others to join us on the mission of delivering on the promise of Black higher education. Our executive leadership arm was created specifically to work directly with our college presidents who sit at the helm of these institutions and to partner with our boards of trustees to make sure that there's accountability, but also support for leadership, and more importantly, that the vision of the institutions is enabled and elevated to a point where it continues on to help continue on this mission.
I love it. So what do you see for the future of higher education?
Zillah Fluker sees the future of higher education as a tremendous opportunity. It's our duty to really explore that and be open-minded and come out of what we've known as the norm and get comfortable in the uncomfortable, because as the world changes, what we know and we look at history is that education has played a major role in defining the spaces that we occupy. And education is here to stay. It may not look the same as it did before, but I think our duty as leaders is to, one, understand that learning is on a continuum and that higher ed players may not be the traditional student that we're accustomed to, but if fully leveraged can really help us reach heights significantly higher than we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
Well, I will tell you, David and I were saying what great content we felt was going to come out of this episode, and you delivered for us, Zillah. What a pleasure and an honor to have you on this podcast. Before I let you go, I want to outro my guest co-host today. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is.
Would you stop screwing around?
Sorry, that wasn't right. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is. You know him, you love him. He's Dr. David Lind. He is the Director of International Programs at the College of Professional Studies at the Cuse. David, thanks for coordinating this, man. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was a long hiatus. It's really great to be back. And thank you so much, Dr. Fluker, for sharing your insights with us today.
Well, enjoy that coffee from your EdUp mug, Dr. Lind. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. My guest today, your guest today, Dr. Zillah Fluker. She is the Director for Executive Leadership for the Institute of Capacity Building at UNCF. Zillah, did you have a good time on the podcast today?
I had an exceptional time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd.
Oh, yeah.
The Middle States Commission on Higher Education 2023 Annual Conference is in Philadelphia, December 4th through 6th. Setting the standard, transformation through accreditation. Remember, only you can create transformation through networking, knowledge sharing, opportunity, leadership, service, learning, and accreditation. And you'll do all those things at the Middle States Commission on Higher Education Annual Conference this December, 4th through 6th. Can't wait to be there. EdUp will be there. There's going to be over 1,300 attendees, presidents, provosts. The networking opportunities are off the chain. Register now at msche.org.
Oh, yeah.
Attention higher ed marketing and enrollment management professionals. We are taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us at Insights EDU on February 20th to 22nd, 2024 in Phoenix, Arizona. Gain insight into the latest higher education trends and cutting-edge marketing strategies that'll take your institution's enrollment to a whole new level. This is your opportunity to connect with higher education leaders and marketing experts from across the country. Comprehensive presentations, engaging panel discussions, and more. Insights EDU will equip you to position your institution for growth. Register now at insightsedu.com and use the code EdUp to save $50 off your registration. Can you afford to miss this conference?
I don't think so.